No other artists in the Renaissance really showed that much interest in the natural world and the surrounding world.
Day 19, 3 a.m. In a quiet laboratory in Florence, a single number on a monitor keeps rising. 67%, 71%, 78%. Researchers stare at the screen as an AI system analyzes the Last Supper with a level of precision no human has ever achieved. Then it happens. The neural network detects something hidden beneath the painting's surface, something that has remained invisible for more than 500 years. Not a preliminary sketch, not Leonardo's signature, not even a forgotten note. What the AI uncovers is far stranger. A sequence of symbols written in Leonardo's famous mirror script, woven through the arrangement of the disciples and concealed inside a spiral pattern so complex that only advanced mathematical analysis could reveal it. The scientist watches as the system begins to decode the message, and when the final translation appears on the screen, nobody says a word. Because what Leonardo left behind wasn't intended for the people of the Renaissance. It wasn't meant for his patrons or his students. It was meant for us, and the message he hid inside the world's most famous painting may completely change the way we think about humanity itself. The man who buried ideas. Here is the deal with Leonardo. Thousands of pages of his personal notebooks survive, almost all of them written in mirror script, backward handwriting that only resolves when held up to a reflection. Layered with invented shorthand and geometric drawings, researchers are still decoding them 5 centuries later. Some scholars argue it was simple convenience for a left-handed man who did not want to smudge his ink. Others say something deeper was going on. Either way, the result is the same. This was a man who buried ideas the way other people lock doors, and he had every reason to. Leonardo lived in an era when the Catholic Church held near absolute authority over what could be known, written, and taught. Independent thinking that questions about Scripture could kill you. Galileo would later be placed under house arrest for suggesting the earth moved around the sun. Giordano Bruno would be burned alive in a public square for proposing similar ideas, and Leonardo, already whispered about for his unconventional lifestyle and his relentless obsession with how the world actually worked, knew exactly what the cost was of saying the wrong thing out loud. So, he did not say it. He painted it, and whatever he painted was meant to stay hidden until a mind not yet born came looking for it. The technique nobody understood. When Leonardo began work on the Last Supper in 1495 at Santa Maria delle Grazie in Milan, he made a decision that baffled his contemporaries. Instead of using buono fresco, the standard technique of bonding pigment to wet plaster so the paint becomes permanent, he invented his own method. Oil and tempera applied to dry plaster. Richer colors, finer detail, and the paint started flaking off the wall almost immediately. Within decades, the mural was already deteriorating. For centuries, art historians dismiss this as one of Leonardo's rare failures. But here is what almost nobody points out. His unusual technique accidentally created something a traditional fresco never could. Layers. Multiple distinct physical layers of paint stacked on top of each other, where markings on a lower surface would be completely invisible from above. A message written into the plaster, then painted over, would be hidden not just from casual viewers, but from every restorer, every scholar,
After 8
every
years of
X-ray
defending this
technician
approach,
working with
she is
older
beginning
equipment.
to wonder quietly whether she has guided her career into a very costly dead end. Then, on day 19, the system detects an anomaly. A cluster of faint markings in a section of wall directly behind Jesus, the same dark patch she had been studying for weeks, convinced something existed there but unable to prove it. Not brushstrokes, not plaster fractures, not any artifact she has encountered in a decade of fresco imaging. Something entirely different. The AI labels the markings with a 67% probability of being intentional writing. That number flashes red on her monitor. Not conclusive, not yet fully certain, but enough to ignite a very loud debate. Rossi grabs her phone and calls Marco Ferretti. The debate. Ferretti, the team's senior imaging specialist, arrives at the Florence lab before sunrise, wearing the same overcoat he has worn every winter for a decade. He takes one look at the flagged area and folds his arms. "Efflorescence," he says bluntly. Mineral deposits seeping through the plaster. I've seen it 100 times. It means nothing. Rossi disagrees. She pulls up a comparison on the split screen, the flagged markings beside a sample of Leonardo's mirror writing from the Codex Arundel. The curved shapes are strikingly similar. The spacing between the marks is too consistent. Efflorescence doesn't create uniform letter spacing, she tells him. It doesn't repeat at predictable intervals across separate sections of a wall. Ferretti does not back down.
Every scholar, every X-ray technician working with older equipment. Think about that for a second. If you wanted to write something that could get you killed if anyone saw it, but you also wanted it to survive long enough for someone to eventually read it, you would need exactly two things. A surface nobody would think to scrape, and a hiding method that would not show up under any tool that existed in your lifetime. Leonardo's technique, by design or accident, delivered both. For 5 centuries, the mural sat on that refectory wall. Monks ate beneath it. Napoleonic soldiers used the room as a stable. In August 1943, Allied bombs leveled the cloister around it, and only a protective scaffolding of sandbags kept the mural from being obliterated entirely. Through all those eyes, through all those instruments, nobody found what was underneath. It would take a machine to finally see what Leonardo had hidden.
The discovery engine. Let's be honest about what the science actually backs up. That part is important. The Last Supper has been the focus of intensive scientific imaging since the late 20th century. During the groundbreaking restoration directed by Pininfarina Barcelon from 1978 to 1999, a meticulous 21-year project advanced imaging methods, including infrared reflectography and X-ray analysis, stripped away the visible surface layer. Those scans uncovered Leonardo's original sketches, the adjustments he made while composing the work, and details buried beneath centuries of dirt and aggressive earlier restoration attempts. Then, in 2007, a digitization project recorded the mural at 16 billion pixels, a level of detail even Leonardo could never have imagined. The hyperspectral scan data still exists today, stored in archives. What is happening in Rossi's lab is simply the next logical step, feeding those existing high-resolution scans into a neural network trained specifically on Leonardo's mirror writing and his coded notebook language. Not creating new imaging, but giving fresh eyes to data already available. The technology is already functioning. The only missing piece until now has been a system capable of separating intentional writing from 5 centuries of plaster deterioration. That is the piece Rossi's lab developed, and on day 19, the numbers on her monitor stop acting the way noise normally acts. Day 19. For the first 2 weeks, the system produces nothing unusual. Imaging distortions, plaster decay, background interference. Rossi drinks too much coffee and spends more nights sleeping on the cot in the corner of the lab than at home.
Does not back down.
After 8 years of defending this approach, doesn't preserve she is beginning to wonder, we're seeing what we want to see. This is confirmation bias disguised as data. The discussion grows tense. A junior researcher quietly slips out of the room. The team is divided into 2 camps. Half believe they are chasing illusions buried in deteriorated plaster. Half think they may be standing on the brink of the most important art discovery in a century. There is no middle ground. Either Rossi has spent 8 years building an instrument that finally works, or she has spent 8 years building an instrument that detects patterns in noise. By 3 o'clock in the morning, the lab was empty. Rossi remains alone. She pulls up a second scan from another section of the wall, one the AI has not yet identified, and begins feeding it into the network manually. Her coffee has gone cold. The 2016 rejection letter is still pinned above her desk, exactly where it is hung for 8 years. She doesn't look at it. She doesn't have to. The monitor refreshes. A new confidence score slowly begins to appear. If your stomach just sank reading that, subscribe right now. Because what the AI uncovers over the next 72 hours is where this stops being a data anomaly and becomes something much closer to a message in a bottle, arriving 5 centuries late, addressed to someone who would not exist for another half millennium. And once you see what it actually says about us, you can't unsee it. 72 hours. The neural network processes additional sections of the mural: the shadowed spaces beneath the table, the stone archways in the background, the deep folds in the disciples' robes, and the same type of markings continue to appear. Not everywhere, not at random, but in specific recurring locations, always within the darker, less studied areas, the exact places where a hidden layer of text would be least likely to be disturbed by a restorer's brush or noticed by the naked eye. Now think about that for a moment. He chose where to hide them. He selected the parts of the composition future viewers would naturally overlook: the shadows behind the disciples, the architectural vanishing points that pull the eye away rather than toward, the folds of fabric where the painted surface is most visually complex. He understood, 5 centuries before anyone could prove it, exactly where on the wall human attention would not linger. The AI's confidence scores continue rising: 71%, 78%, 83%. Individual letter forms begin to emerge on the screen, reversed characters matching mirror writing. The system cross-references them against Leonardo's known handwriting from the Codex Arundel, and the match rate keeps increasing. Isolated words start surfacing from the visual noise: umbra, shadow; verita, truth; tradimento, betrayal. Ferretti stops arguing. He doesn't declare that he's convinced. Instead, he sets down the printout he has been holding for the past hour, removes his glasses, and rubs his eyes. That is the moment. That silence, coming from the most vocal skeptic in the room, tells Rossi everything she needs to know. They are not looking at mineral deposits. They are looking at Leonardo's handwriting hidden beneath the most famous painting on Earth, and the AI has only completed scanning 12% of the surface. The spiral. This is where things become truly strange. The AI does not simply uncover isolated words. As more sections are processed, the fragments begin linking together. Short phrases emerge, then longer ones, and they are not arranged by chance. The system identifies a structural pattern, a spiral beginning at Jesus' right hand and expanding outward, moving across each disciple in sequence. The placement follows proportions aligned with the golden ratio, a mathematical principle Leonardo was famously fascinated by and incorporated throughout his work, from the Vitruvian Man to the Mona Lisa. The words are not merely hidden inside the painting, they are woven into its architecture, embedded within the geometry, part of the composition itself. The AI is not uncovering decoration, it is uncovering a document. A document Leonardo built into the framework of his most public masterpiece, trusting the mathematics of the universe to preserve it. The first fully coherent phrase appears along the wall directly behind Jesus. When the system translates it from Leonardo's archaic Florentine dialect, it reads, "All faith fades when light reveals the hand of man." Rossi reads the line aloud in the lab. No one reacts immediately. It takes several seconds for the meaning to settle in. The statement suggests that what people regard as divine might actually be a human creation, that faith itself could dissolve the moment it is examined under sufficient light. In a painting portraying the defining moment of Christian sacrifice, displayed on the wall of a church where monks shared meals beneath it for centuries. The message is a quiet explosion, but it is still only one sentence. It could be an isolated thought, a fragment that somehow found its way into the composition, a coincidence disguised as text, not yet a pattern. Then the AI identifies the second inscription. More messages. Near the shadow of Judas Iscariot, the network extracts another line from the darkness. He who eats with truth will not betray himself. A third emerges beneath Peter. Strength without understanding is blind. Near Thomas, the apostle who famously doubted the resurrection until he touched the wounds, another phrase takes shape. To question is not sin, but the path to clarity. Each message is connected to a specific disciple. Each one reinterprets that figure's biblical identity through the lens of reason rather than faith. And here is the striking part. These do not sound like attacks on religion. They sound like invitations, challenges urging the viewer to think rather than simply believe. Leonardo is embedding an entire philosophical framework into the painting itself, a worldview that places human inquiry alongside religious revelation, a hidden message about humanity written by a man who could not openly say it and survive. Now consider this, because this is the moment that truly stunned the room. 250 years after Leonardo set down his brush, Voltaire would write about freedom of thought. Diderot would compile the Encyclopédie, a monument to reason over revelation. Rousseau, Hume, and Kant would reshape the intellectual foundations of the Western world and pull European civilization into the Enlightenment. Everything those thinkers argued for, everything the Enlightenment struggled to establish, Leonardo had already encoded it onto a refectory wall in 1497, while they were still 2.5 centuries away from being born. Leonardo was operating in an entirely different era. He was not merely ahead of his time, he was operating beyond it. And the AI had just pulled the evidence from the paint itself, the accusation. Then the AI uncovers something that completely changes the mood in the room. In the lower right section of the mural, hidden beneath multiple layers of paint near the disciples' feet, the system reconstructs a longer passage. Those who hold power will bury truth beneath stone until the eyes of the future uncover it. That is no longer philosophy. That is a direct accusation aimed at institutions that conceal knowledge. And it does not sound like it was written for Leonardo's own time. It sounds like it was written for whoever would eventually discover it, which means us. Ferretti, who has spoken very little for days, finally breaks the silence. He knew, he says quietly. He knew someone would eventually find this. He was writing to the future. Picture it. Leonardo stood on scaffolding inside a cold Milan refectory in 1497, painting over his own hidden words, fully aware that nobody living in his century would ever read them. The priests eating beneath the mural would never see the message concealed behind the Christ they worshipped. His friends, his patrons, even his apprentices would walk past that wall 1,000 times and notice only the surface. He was writing for an audience that would not exist for another 500 years. Relying on nothing but faith in future minds that someone would eventually come searching. That someone would create a tool capable of reading his message. That a person not yet born would have the courage to reveal what they found. The AI had just proven him right, and it still was not finished. Vindication. Rossi's hands are trembling not from fear, but from something closer to adrenaline mixed with disbelief. For 22 years, she has studied this man's work. 22 years of research papers, conference presentations, and grant proposals, arguing that Leonardo's art contained layers of meaning that existing scholarship had barely begun to explore. Colleagues called her theories romantic. The 2016 peer review that has hung above her desk for 8 years described her hypothesis as imaginative but unsupported by material evidence. Half a grudge, half a source of motivation. And now, right in front of her on a glowing monitor, that evidence is appearing letter by letter. She is not simply witnessing a discovery, she is watching her entire career either be validated or collapse, depending on whether the findings survive peer review. And somewhere in the back of her mind, she also realizes that if the translations hold true, her name is about to become attached to one of the most culturally explosive announcements of the 21st century. She does not yet know whether that is a blessing or a burden. The deepest layer. The deepest layer comes last. Beneath the original pigment of Jesus' robe, so faint that only maximum resolution hyperspectral imaging can reveal it, the AI resolves a final inscription. Truth belongs not to saints, but to those who seek it in silence. Rossi reads the line. The lab remains completely still. Then the system does something nobody on the team specifically programmed it to do. It assembles every recovered phrase in sequence, following the spiral pattern from the center outward, and reveals a unified statement, a single continuous sentence woven through all 12 disciples, emerging only when read in the geometric order Leonardo had established through the placement of his figures. Faith without reason is the sleep of truth, and those who awaken shall see what was forbidden. Rossi drops her head into her hands and laughs, a short, breathless, slightly unsteady laugh. She understands exactly what that sentence means, and she understands exactly what will happen when the world hears it. The lab has roughly 72 hours before someone leaks the data. What this actually changes. If the findings survive independent verification, it would mean the Last Supper was never simply a devotional painting. It was a work with two purposes: a public commission fulfilling a religious obligation on the surface, and a private act of intellectual defiance beneath it. A hidden message about humanity concealed within an icon of faith. And that changes more than just this painting. If Leonardo hid text here, did he hide it in the Mona Lisa? In the Virgin of the Rocks? In the unfinished adoration of the Magi? In the every Virgin Leonardo of the painting in every museum on Earth? In the unfinished adoration of the Magi? Every Leonardo painting in every museum on Earth would need to be scanned again. Here is the question the field is not ready to ask out loud. If Leonardo was willing to hide a philosophical manifesto inside the most public religious commission of his era, how many other Renaissance masters may have been doing the same thing? How many paintings hanging in the Louvre, the Uffizi, and the Prado right now are carrying encoded arguments no human eye has ever detected? The Last Supper might not be the exception. It might be the first crack in a much larger wall. The reaction. The findings become public, first through a leaked preprint, then through a flood of international media coverage. The reaction is every bit as chaotic as Rossi expected. Professor James Whitfield, a Renaissance historian at Cambridge, appears on the BBC within 48 hours. He arrives with a coffee stain on his collar and the slightly bewildered expression of a man who was awakened by a producer 4 hours earlier. He calls it the most significant reinterpretation of a major artwork since X-ray analysis revealed Picasso's hidden paintings. The spiral structure and the golden ratio alignment make random deterioration an almost impossible explanation. You do not get mathematical precision from mineral leaching. Nature does not write in Tuscan dialect. The Vatican's response arrives 3 days later. A carefully crafted statement from the Pontifical Council for Culture acknowledges the remarkable technological achievement while urging caution against premature conclusions that could distort the spiritual legacy of sacred art. Behind the statement, however, the internal mood is far less diplomatic. Senior cardinals reportedly described the findings as a media provocation disguised as scholarship. At least one Vatican-affiliated art historian quietly tells colleagues that if the scans are authentic, the Church may need to reconsider its entire relationship with Renaissance patronage from the ground up. In Milan, nearly 300 protesters gather outside Santa Maria delle Grazie on the first Saturday after the story breaks. Half demand that the original scans be released publicly. Half carry signs reading, "Leave the Last Supper in peace," and "Faith is not a data set." Italian police create a path to the entrance, but images of officers standing between protesters and the most famous painting on Earth spread across the internet within hours. A smaller but louder protest erupts at the Uffizi in Florence, where demonstrators block the main entrance for 6 hours, forcing the museum to redirect visitors through a side gallery. In Rome, a group of theology students hold a candlelit vigil in St. Peter's Square, not to protest the discovery, but to publicly call for dialogue instead of a cultural war. Online, the reaction is even more intense. The hashtag Da Vinci decoded trends globally for 11 straight days. Conspiracy theorists claim the messages prove Leonardo belonged to a secret society. Atheist commentators seize on the findings as evidence that history's greatest minds always questioned organized religion. Religious commentators respond that a speculative AI interpretation of deteriorated plaster is being treated as unquestionable truth, which they point out is deeply ironic. Drop your theories in the comments below. I read every single one, and if this video changed the way you think, hit that subscribe button and ring the bell, because we are only beginning to pull back the curtain on what history may have been quietly hiding from us.